The planet of Emer was a masterpiece of natural and architectural beauty. Its oceans shimmered like molten crystal under twin suns, while its cities rose elegantly from the ground, their translucent towers reflecting the light in brilliant hues of blue and violet. The people of Emer, the Torvaldians, were known across the galaxy for their wisdom, their dedication to peace, and their complete rejection of violence. To the Torvaldians, war was an ancient and barbaric relic, something they had transcended centuries ago. When humans first arrived on Emer, the Torvaldians were both fascinated and concerned. The humans were explorers, seeking knowledge and trade, but they were also warriors. Their ships, sleek and powerful, bristled with weapons, an unsettling sight for a species that had long ago dismantled its military. Yet, humans did not come as invaders. They came with an offer of mutual cooperation. The leader of the Torvaldians, Chancellor Esvar, saw this as an opportunity to learn more about this curious species. The first meeting between Chancellor Esvar and Ambassador Jonathan Gray was a formal affair, held in the Great Hall of Crystal. The hall was a magnificent structure, its walls made entirely of shimmering crystal that seemed to pulse with a gentle, inner light. Jonathan Gray, a tall, stern man with graying hair and sharp features, stood out in this environment like a soldier in a temple. He was accompanied by Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, a younger officer who carried herself with the disciplined calm of someone well-versed in battle. Esvar welcomed them warmly, curious about their motives. "Welcome to Emer," he said, his voice as soft as the winds that gently rustled the gardens outside. "We are honored to host you, and we look forward to learning from one another." Jonathan smiled politely, but there was a wariness in his eyes that Esvar could not ignore. "Thank you, Chancellor. We're eager to share what we know and explore opportunities for collaboration." Over the course of the next several weeks, the humans and Torvaldians engaged in numerous discussions, exchanging information about their cultures, technologies, and philosophies. The humans marveled at Emer's peacefulness, its beauty untouched by the ravages of war. But for all the Torvaldians' wisdom, there was one thing the humans could not understand: their complete absence of a military force. One evening, during a private meeting in the Chancellor's personal chambers, Esvar broached the subject. "Ambassador, I've noticed something curious about your people. You speak often of conflict and defense, of preparing for war. Yet, you're here in peace. Tell me, why do you always carry the specter of violence with you?" Jonathan took a moment to respond, choosing his words carefully. "Chancellor, it's not that we seek violence. In fact, we've had enough of it in our history to last several lifetimes. But the galaxy isn't always as peaceful as Emer. There are forces out there that only respect strength, that would take advantage of any perceived weakness. We've learned that the best way to ensure peace is to be ready for war." Esvar frowned, troubled by this response. "To us, that is overkill. We have not had need of an army in over 500 years. We believe that understanding and diplomacy are the most effective tools for maintaining peace. Violence only begets more violence." Jonathan nodded but said nothing. It was clear to him that the Torvaldians didn't fully grasp the darker realities of the galaxy, realities that, as a species, humanity had come to know all too well. Weeks passed, and relations between the humans and Torvaldians continued to develop. Trade agreements were signed, and cultural exchanges flourished. However, beneath the surface, a growing tension began to emerge, one that was felt keenly by both sides. Rumors of unrest from the outer regions of Torvaldian space began to filter in, and they were deeply concerning. A species known as the Astorians, notorious for their ruthless conquests, had been expanding their reach into neighboring star systems. Chancellor Esvar remained calm, confident that diplomacy would prevail as it always had. "The Astorians may be warlike, but they are rational beings," he told his council. "We will send envoys to reason with them. They will see the benefits of peace." But Jonathan was not so sure. He had read the reports on the Astorians and knew that their reputation for cruelty was well earned. "Chancellor," Jonathan said during a private meeting, "the Astorians don't negotiate. They take. And if they see an opportunity, they will take everything. Your lack of military defenses is an open invitation." Esvar was visibly unsettled by Jonathan's bluntness but refused to believe that violence was the only answer. "We have faced threats before, and we have always found a way to resolve them peacefully." Jonathan glanced at Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, who sat quietly at the side of the room, listening intently. Her eyes betrayed her agreement with Jonathan, but like him, she held her tongue. The Torvaldians were a proud people, and their faith in diplomacy was unshakable. That night, back aboard the human ship Resolute, Jonathan and Sarah discussed their concerns in private. "They won't see it coming," Sarah said quietly, her voice tinged with frustration. "The Astorians don't care about peace treaties. They care about resources, and Emer is ripe for the taking." Jonathan nodded grimly. "We can't force them to prepare. But we need to be ready ourselves." Without informing the Torvaldians, Jonathan quietly ordered his fleet to remain on high alert. He had seen too many peaceful worlds fall because they had placed their trust in words rather than weapons. The Astorians struck without warning. They bypassed Emer's central defenses, such as they were, and launched a devastating assault on Phaedra, a neighboring system that had been colonized by the Torvaldians as a research outpost. The colony was home to thousands of scientists, engineers, and their families, none of whom were prepared for the brutality of the Astorian attack. In a matter of hours, Phaedra was reduced to a smoking ruin. The Astorians descended upon the planet like locusts, burning everything in their path and enslaving the survivors. The Torvaldians, accustomed to a life of peace, were completely unprepared for such savagery. The news of the attack spread quickly, reaching Emer within hours. Chancellor Esvar was devastated. "We must reach out to the Astorians," he insisted during an emergency council meeting. "Surely, they will listen to reason. We can negotiate a settlement, a way to end this without further bloodshed." But Jonathan, who had seen the destruction on Phaedra firsthand through recon reports, knew better. "Chancellor, with all due respect, the time for talking is over. The Astorians aren't interested in peace. They're interested in conquest." Esvar stared at Jonathan in disbelief. "We cannot stoop to their level. Violence will only breed more violence." Jonathan's voice hardened. "Sometimes, Chancellor, the only way to stop a bully is to punch them in the mouth." Esvar was visibly shaken by Jonathan's words, but he refused to give in to fear. "There must be another way." The human delegation, frustrated by the Torvaldians' refusal to act, decided to take matters into their own hands. Jonathan and Sarah mobilized their fleet, sending a small but heavily armed strike force to intercept the Astorians before they could reach Emer. The Torvaldians, unaware of the humans' actions, continued to pursue diplomatic channels, sending envoys to the Astorian capital in a futile attempt to broker peace. The Astorian fleet, however, was already on its way, prepared to conquer Emer as they had done with Phaedra. They expected little resistance. What they encountered instead was a wall of human warships, their weapon systems locked and loaded. The battle that followed was swift and brutal. The Astorians, accustomed to overwhelming their enemies with sheer numbers and firepower, were unprepared for the precision and lethality of the human strike force. In a matter of minutes, the human warships cut through the Astorian fleet, their advanced weapon systems reducing the enemy ships to smoldering wreckage. When the smoke cleared, Jonathan sent a single message to the Astorian command ship. "This is just a taste of what we can do. If you come any closer, we'll bring the rest." The Astorians, stunned by the ferocity of the human response, retreated. For the first time in their history, they had encountered an enemy that didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, and didn't hold back. Back on Emer, the Torvaldians were horrified. When they learned of the human intervention, Chancellor Esvar summoned Jonathan to the council chambers, his face pale with anger. "What you did was barbaric," Esvar said, his voice trembling with emotion. "You massacred them. There was no need for such overkill." Jonathan remained calm, though his jaw tightened at Esvar's words. "What we did was necessary. If we hadn't acted, your planet would be in flames right now." Esvar shook his head. "This is not how we resolve conflicts. There must have been another way." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Sometimes there isn't." The aftermath of the battle left the Torvaldians shaken to their core. Emer had been spared, but the cost had been high. The destruction of the Astorian fleet was a brutal reminder that the galaxy was not as peaceful as they had believed. For the first time in centuries, the Torvaldians found themselves questioning their commitment to nonviolence. Esvar, struggling to come to terms with what had happened, convened the High Council to discuss the future of Emer. Some council members argued that the humans had saved them, that their intervention had been necessary to prevent total annihilation. Others, however, believed that the humans' actions had only escalated the situation, drawing Emer into a conflict it could have avoided. Jonathan attended the council meeting as an observer, listening quietly as the Torvaldians debated their next steps. When the floor was opened to him, he stood and addressed the council. "Chancellor, members of the council," Jonathan began, his voice calm but firm. "I understand that what we did may seem excessive. But you need to understand something about the galaxy. There are species out there that won't respect your ideals, your commitment to peace. The Astorians don't care about diplomacy. They care about power. If we hadn't acted, your planet would have been destroyed." Isvar looked weary, his face lined with worry. "And now what? Are we to live in constant fear? To prepare for war at every moment?" Jonathan shook his head. "No. But you need to be ready to defend yourselves. Peace is a wonderful thing, but it has to be protected." In the days following the battle, tensions between the humans and Torvaldians remained high. While the human delegation had proven their worth in defending Emer, many Torvaldians could not shake the feeling that their way of life had been fundamentally altered by the violence they had witnessed. Lieutenant Sarah Martinez, who had fought in the battle alongside Jonathan, felt the weight of these tensions acutely. She had grown to admire the Torvaldians for their idealism, even as she understood the harsh realities of the galaxy. One evening, she and Jonathan sat in the observation deck of the Resolute, looking out at the stars. "They think we're monsters," Sarah said quietly, her voice heavy with guilt. Jonathan shrugged, his expression unreadable. "Maybe we are. But better to be a monster than a victim." Just as things began to return to a fragile normalcy, new intelligence reports arrived. The Astorians had not given up. They had formed an alliance with a mercenary group known as the Drakkar, a fearsome race of nomadic warriors who fought for the highest bidder. Together, the Astorians and Drakkar represented a formidable force, one that even the humans might struggle to repel. Isvar, upon hearing the news, was paralyzed by indecision. The council was divided, and the people of Emer were growing increasingly anxious. Meanwhile, Jonathan and Sarah prepared for the worst. "We can't wait for them to hit us," Jonathan said grimly. "We have to take the fight to them." The battle that followed was unlike anything the Torvaldians had ever seen. The Astorian-Drakkar alliance descended upon Emer with overwhelming force, their ships filling the skies like a storm of locusts. The humans, though outnumbered, fought with a precision and relentlessness that left the enemy reeling. The Torvaldians watched from the ground in horror as the sky above them burned with the fury of the battle. For the first time, they understood what it meant to live in a galaxy where peace was not guaranteed. When the battle finally ended, Emer was saved, but the scars of war were everywhere. The once pristine skies were filled with the wreckage of destroyed ships, and the ground trembled with the echoes of the orbital bombardments. Chancellor Isvar, standing amidst the devastation, realized that his world would never be the same. Jonathan approached him, his face somber. "We didn't want this, Chancellor. But sometimes, the universe doesn't give you a choice." In the months that followed, Emer began to rebuild. The Torvaldians, once steadfast in their belief in nonviolence, had come to understand that peace was not something that could be taken for granted. They had learned from the humans, but they had also held onto their ideals. As the human delegation prepared to leave, Chancellor Isvar approached Jonathan one final time. "Your ways may be harsh," he said, "but they saved us. Perhaps there is wisdom in your approach, even if we cannot fully embrace it." Jonathan smiled faintly. "Overkill is only overkill if it's more than necessary." As the months passed after the humans left Emer, the Torvaldians began to grapple with the aftermath of their world's first true brush with intergalactic violence. The scars from the battle had started to fade, but the deeper wounds, the ones etched into the minds of the people, remained. The quiet, peaceful hum that once filled the cities had been replaced by an undercurrent of tension and fear. Chancellor Isvar, who had led his people for decades with an unshakable commitment to diplomacy, now found himself in the unfamiliar position of making decisions he never imagined he'd face. Should Emer remain defenseless and continue to rely solely on diplomacy, or should they take up arms to protect themselves from future threats? The council was as divided as ever. Some, especially the younger generation, argued that Emer must change, must adapt to the realities of a dangerous galaxy. They spoke of building defenses, forging alliances with militarized species, and even training a standing army. They pointed to the humans as an example of balance, capable of great creativity and peace, yet not afraid to unleash their power when necessary. But the older council members, Isvar included, still clung to their ancient ideals. To build weapons is to invite war, they would say. If we arm ourselves, we lose what makes us who we are. Despite this, Iesvar could not ignore the growing unrest among his people. Fear had taken root, and with that fear came doubt. Doubt in his leadership, doubt in their way of life. And so, after months of deliberation, Iesvar made a decision that shocked the council. He would make a journey to Earth, the homeworld of humanity, to learn firsthand how the humans had managed to walk the line between peace and power. The journey to Earth was a long one, requiring Iesvar and a small delegation to travel through hyperspace corridors that twisted and stretched the very fabric of the universe. Iesvar had never traveled beyond the peaceful borders of Torvaldian space, and as their ship glided through the stars, he couldn't help but marvel at how vast and unpredictable the galaxy truly was. As Ymir grew smaller in the distance, he felt a pang of doubt. He had always believed that Ymir could serve as a beacon of hope for the galaxy, a place where violence was unnecessary, where conflicts could be resolved through reason. But his interactions with the humans had shaken that belief to its core. The ship's captain, a young but experienced navigator named Elara, sensed the Chancellor's unease. She approached him as they passed by the glowing nebula of the Orion Arm. "Chancellor," she began softly, "I know this must be difficult for you. Leaving Ymir, traveling to a place like Earth. It's not what you envisioned, is it?" Iesvar smiled faintly, though his eyes remained distant. "No, Elara, it's not. But I am beginning to realize that perhaps my vision of the galaxy was incomplete. I always believed that reason and peace could overcome any obstacle. But I have seen, now, that there are forces in this universe that do not listen to reason." Elara nodded, her gaze fixed on the swirling stars ahead. "The humans have seen much more conflict than we have. Their history is filled with war, but also with resilience. I think you'll learn a great deal from them." Iesvar sighed. "I hope so. I fear what this journey may lead us to become." When the delegation from Ymir arrived in the Sol system, Earth lay before them, a blue and green orb surrounded by hundreds of orbiting stations, spaceports, and defense platforms. It was a far cry from Ymir, whose skies were uncluttered by such signs of militarization. The sight of so many defense systems put Iesvar on edge. This was a planet that had clearly fought many wars. The Earth government had rolled out the proverbial red carpet for Iesvar and his delegation, eager to continue building diplomatic ties with the Torvaldians. Ambassador Jonathan Gray greeted them upon landing, his expression warmer and more relaxed than Iesvar remembered. Though the tensions of Ymir's past events still lingered, there was a sense of mutual respect now, a bond forged not just by words, but by shared experience. "Welcome to Earth, Chancellor," Jonathan said with a smile. "I'm honored to host you and your delegation. We've prepared for your arrival for weeks." Iesvar nodded politely, but his eyes wandered to the towering skyscrapers of New London, a city that had been rebuilt after one of Earth's many conflicts. Even from the shuttle, he could see evidence of the planet's violent past, battle-scarred monuments, museums dedicated to fallen soldiers, and streets filled with people who carried an air of resilience. "You've rebuilt much," Iesvar observed as they walked through the bustling spaceport. "Your cities, your people. They seem to have thrived after so much destruction." Jonathan chuckled softly. "Humanity's greatest strength has always been its ability to rebuild. After every war, after every crisis, we've come back stronger. But it's not something I'm proud of, Chancellor. We've had to pay a high price for that resilience." Iesvar looked at Jonathan, considering his words carefully. "That is why I am here, Ambassador. To learn how your people have managed to balance peace with the need for strength. Ymir is at a crossroads, and I fear we may lose ourselves if we stray too far from our ideals." Jonathan led Iesvar and the delegation through the streets of New London, eventually arriving at the Central Museum of Human History. Inside, the exhibits told the story of humanity's long and bloody history, from ancient tribal conflicts to the devastating world wars, all the way to the galactic conflicts of the 23rd century. Iesvar and his delegation walked through the halls, their faces pale as they observed the weapons, the destruction, the sheer scale of loss that humanity had endured. "I see now why your people have chosen the path you have," Iesvar said quietly as they stood before a massive holographic display depicting Earth's history of war. "You have been shaped by war in a way that my people cannot fully understand." Jonathan nodded. "We've been forced to adapt. But we've also learned something valuable. Peace is worth fighting for. It's a paradox, I know. But in a galaxy where predators like the Astorians exist, It's a lesson we've had to learn. Isvar remained silent, lost in thought. The weight of the decision before him loomed large. Could Ymir find a way to protect itself without becoming a militarized society? Could they retain their ideals of peace while acknowledging the need for strength? That evening, Jonathan and Isvar sat together in the gardens of the human embassy. The sky above Earth was a brilliant canvas of stars, and the air was crisp and cool. Isvar looked up at the sky, wondering how far Ymir had come from the peaceful existence it once knew. "I did not want this for my people," Isvar admitted, his voice heavy with regret. "We were supposed to be a beacon of peace, an example to others." Jonathan regarded him with understanding. "You can still be that beacon, Chancellor. But peace doesn't mean naivety. You've seen what happens when you trust too much in the goodness of others. There are species, like the Astorians, who will take advantage of that trust." Isvar nodded slowly. "But to build defenses, to prepare for war, isn't that inviting conflict?" "Not necessarily," Jonathan replied. "Look at Earth. We have powerful defenses, yes, but we also have strong diplomatic ties, trade agreements, and cultural exchanges. Strength doesn't always mean aggression. It can be a deterrent." Isvar was quiet for a long moment, considering Jonathan's words. "And you think my people can walk that line? To be strong without losing themselves?" Jonathan smiled faintly. "I think you already know the answer, Chancellor. It's not about losing who you are. It's about protecting who you are. Overkill, as we humans call it, is only overkill if it's more than necessary. And sometimes, what's necessary changes." As the stars above twinkled in the cold night sky, Isvar finally understood. Ymir could remain a beacon of peace, but it would need to evolve. They could no longer ignore the reality of the galaxy. To survive, they would need to find a balance between their ideals and the need to defend those ideals. And with that realization, Isvar knew what he had to do when he returned to Ymir.